In September of this year, Vera Drew went viral. The cause was bittersweet. On the one hand, she was invited to the prestigious Toronto International Film Festival to premiere her imaginative film, The People's Joker, a transgender coming out story wrapped in a lovingly hallucinatory parody of the DC cinematic universe. On the other hand, Warner Brothers and DC Comics intervened to pressure Vera and the festival into withdrawing the film after a single screening, raising questions of intellectual property, parody, and fair use that are still being worked out behind the scenes. The crisis of the People's Joker feels particularly relevant, and yet the film is almost impossible to see at present, an enticing concept restrained by the very forces which it toys with and skewers on screen.
As far back as I could remember, I always wanted to be a Joker.
The People's Joker stars and is written, directed, and edited by Vera. It depicts a world in which comedy is illegal unless licensed by the city-state of Gotham City, which is overseen by a pot-bellied, closeted gay, abusive billionaire wannabe politician who dresses in a batsuit. You may have heard of him. Modeling its story structure in large part on Todd Phillips' already subversive Joker from 2019, and shot during the difficult conditions of the COVID-19 pandemic, the film fuses a sympathetic, supposedly villain's eye view with a radical stylistic approach, a collage of multiple mediums and decades of Batman adaptations, employing extensively animated backgrounds behind green-screened comedians and/or actors. Vera is an editor who's worked with Tim and Eric and Sacha Baron Cohen, and she brings many of her colleagues on board for cameos or more substantive supporting roles. Of course, this is a Twin Peaks podcast, not a Batman one. So in addition to the fascinating twists and turns of Vera's life and career, I'm going to talk with my guest about David Lynch's work on TV, in film, and perhaps especially online, both on its own terms and for the way it influenced her. Although we begin by honing in on her history with Peaks, much of that emphasis will be reserved for part 2, as we focus on the production and the events surrounding People's Joker in this first part. As always, this discussion is split between a public part on YouTube and a longer Patreon-exclusive back section offered to my $5 a month tier. Now, before we get there, a quick update on my own work, since I published the last episode of Twin Peaks Conversations with Colin, the host of Creamed Corn in the Universe, earlier in November. Like that one, this is a bit late due to scheduling conflicts. It's a November reward offered in early December, so you can hopefully expect another Twin Peaks Conversations entry before the month is up. Also on Patreon, I published another roundup of 3 Twin Peaks character studies, months ahead of their public debut. They're ranked by screen time. You can become a patron to not just discover their identities, but read my entire essays on them. And here's what else I was up to in November. My daily Lost in Twin Peaks podcast resumed after pausing this summer, covering a different episode of the 3rd season every week, zooming in on a different aspect of said episode each day, such as story events, the current events of the time, or the in-the-weeds details like character statistics. The podcast has recently covered parts 11, 12, and 13, with part 14, one of my favorites, ongoing right now. On my Twin Peaks Cinema podcast, I continued the disordered stories theme of this mini-season with the Dutch thriller The Vanishing, exploring its deep, rich connections to Twin Peaks in one of my longest episodes. And this morning, I published a new episode for my main Lost in the Movies podcast feed, wrapping up a season of Hollywood classics by looking at the 30s version of Marie Antoinette. You can, as always, check out all of my work on lostinthemovies.com and keep track of long-term projects there too, like the continuation of my Journey Through Twin Peaks series, which we will discuss at a certain point in this discussion with Vera as well. So now let's talk about both Twin Peaks and The People's Joker with Vera Drew. I'm here with Vera Drew, who has just directed and released the film The People's Joker and starred and edited and all kinds of things related to that. And we're going to talk about that film in a second. I've already set it up a little bit. But before we actually get to that, I wanted to start with your connection to Twin Peaks. How'd you get into the show? What made you want to talk about it? But, in addition to People's Joker, because you definitely mentioned to me that, you wanted to come on and talk about Twin Peaks. So let's talk about that first. What's your Twin Peaks link?
Thank you for having me on, because I love your show so much. And I love Twin Peaks so much. It means so much to me. I think I first watched it when I was a freshman in college, and by that point though I was coming to it as like a David Lynch fan. I watched Mulholland Drive when I was like I don't know, way too young to like appreciate it or like definitely understand it on any level. I think it was mostly just that there were lesbians in it and it was like weird and arty and I was into that kind of stuff. But yeah, David Lynch was definitely like my entry point. And yeah, I think like I feel like it clicked for me. Like Twin Peaks clicked for me right away. I feel like I like the irony at times or whatever, whatever is going on with it, whatever whether it's irony or sweet sincerity or
Yeah, it's
whatever.
hard
Like
to tell with David Lynch.
yeah, like it took me a second to really catch up to that. Like I think I was just so lost in just how fucking weird it was. Like I don't know. Like it was like seeing color for the first time or something. Like I think watching that like pilot specifically, like it kind of like broke my brain in terms of like what the potential of like a television show could be.
Now, in terms of like what I guess era this was it on DVD? Were you streaming? Was it actually prior to when they kind of released the whole thing coherently or
This was Gold Box, I think. So
okay, yeah. Same
yeah,
with me.
I was a little yeah, okay, cool. Yeah. I was a little late to it. I wish I had it in like high school or something because I think I would have loved it. I think it would have like, and it certainly would have made me a lot cooler knowing about Twin Peaks
In
in high
some people's
school.
eyes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, some people's eyes. I'm sure the people that were making fun of me wouldn't have thought I was any cooler for liking Twin Peaks.
So once you began your work, I guess let's set up a little bit just to tell people a little bit what you did leading up to People's Joker. Was Twin Peaks always something that was in your mind as you were creating? Did you find certain work kind of facilitated it more than others, or
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so when I went to film school and I really got into experimental film while I was there. And I was really into Maya Deren and
hell yeah.
like Kenneth Anger and like all like the Cremaster cycle that I think that had just come out. I was really obsessed with experimental film and kind of had this like romanticized idea of like what I was going to do with my life while I was in college. And it was like, I'm just going to make art films and do sketch comedy and I'll somehow be able to survive. um, but thankfully, this like interest really coincided with Tim and Eric Awesome Show kind of popping off. And I remember watching that for the first time in college and sort of seeing the alternative comedy thing that was like starting to happen on Adult Swim and in seeing like what really just felt like experimental filmmaking to me on like full display, but like the I guess the comedic version of it. um like you go back and watch some of those episodes of Tim and Eric Awesome Show and like there's some of those segments that are just like they just feel like scenes from like Twin Peaks or like like Mulholland Drive or whatever. And obviously like they used a lot of the same actors too, but yeah, I was like really getting into that stuff and kind of saw that as my way in to like hopefully sort of make a living um making the kind of like scary non-linear you know off-putting or legally gray stuff that I like to make.
Now, this was also, I guess, the era of like David Lynch's digital shorts and stuff. Did you watch? I think you had to have a subscription at that point, but I think they wound up on YouTube pretty quickly. Like, did you watch some of that stuff? Did that have any kind of
Oh yeah.
impact on you? Like his, the stuff that kind of I would say led up to Inland Empire,
I
basically,
was
and
I
some
was
of it was in
way
Inland Empire as well.
no, yeah, exactly. And like I mean it's one of the things that I really love about your show, Joel, is like just how much you focus on that era of Lynch, and like have talked about it and had people on that talk about it. Cause like to me, that really was when I like fully fell in love with my spooky grandpa, David Lynch. Like Dumbland was just like crazy, and like I loved Rabbits so much, and I certainly did not understand Inland Empire the first time I watched it, and still don't, but it's like one of my favorite movies ever, of course. But like, yeah, like seeing what he was doing with digital, because like this was during a time when like, I was in film school, and like I was in one of the first film programs to actually just have a sole focus on digital filmmaking, and it was at DePaul University. And like people didn't take it seriously. And granted, it's because like, I mean, you see how a lot of those shorts he used to make look like they're really grainy and stuff. Like it wasn't anywhere near what it is today, but like he was one of like Lynch was one of the only people that really um was pushing digital forward back then. It was really inspiring to see, especially like coming from, I knew I wanted to make movies when I was 6 years old. Like I knew I was a filmmaker before I knew I was a girl. And like I, like I wanted to be making stuff constantly, and digital really kind of just like made that possible for anybody to do that. I feel like we really, I mean, I sound like a fucking 90-year-old woman right now, but I think we really do take it for granted today. It used to be really hard to make videos, and I think David was like part of the reason why it became more accessible.
Yeah, he really was a pioneer on that front. It's kind of interesting to think about. I think because Inland Empire is such a kind of obscure film in some ways, and it was his last one, and then The Return kind of, popped up 10 years later and maybe, I don't know, overshadows it in some way. But like, I think there might be a tendency in some people's minds to sort of skip from Mulholland Drive to that. You kind of miss the fact that during that decade, he was like at the forefront of this kind of homemade cinema aesthetic in a way. This major director moving in that direction after being, nominated for an Oscar for this grand Hollywood like celluloid drama. Although, of course, that started in TV. He's always kind of taking from different mediums and combining them. But it's just an interesting, I feel like, facet of his career and his persona that does sometimes get kind of bypassed.
It does, and I mean, look, I understand why. I mean, I understand why any era of Lynch gets bypassed by a viewer, but to me, it is one that is just so important, and for like the reasons you've highlighted too, about like sort of seeing that digital era as like a bridge to Twin Peaks: The Return,
Yeah, definitely.
like the Mary Sweeney of it all. Like, I mean, like I just saw the 4K remaster of Inland Empire, and it was gorgeous. It was just crazy, like seeing that in a theater again, and like but that movie has so much, it feels like you still feel the Mary Sweeney of it all in that movie, but you can feel it fading. You
Yeah,
really
definitely.
can. And it's like, it's to me, it's so like bittersweet, and it's such a necessary bridge to The Return, just on a aesthetic and like storytelling level. Like you understand The Return more if you really take into account that, yeah, he made Mulholland Drive, then just spent a ton of time and money and energy just like playing around basically with a camera, and then made this fucking crazy beautiful epic out of it. Like it really is how you get to The Return.
So for your own work, as you did get into like filmmaking and creating, like tell us a little bit of what you did leading up to like before The People's Joker.
Yeah, so I worked at Absolutely Productions for a number of years. It's Tim and Eric's production company, and I came in at a time, it was right after they had made their feature film, and they were gearing up to produce the Eric Andre show. So I came in right when they were starting to do season 1 of Eric Andre, and this was like a time at Absolutely when like the interns kind of still did everything. And like one day I'd be holding a camera, one day I'd be moving a light. Um, the next I'd be, getting Thai iced tea for some weird B-list celebrity that Eric's gonna prank. And it was really cool kind of having that be one of my first experiences, because like I really got to learn a lot because I didn't learn the technical skills in film school because I really don't think anybody should. I think that should really be where like you go to play and make all the mistakes that you hopefully won't make in your career. Like just make weird, like off-putting or unsellable stuff, and get it all out of your system, and worry about like the technical business side of it later. And but yeah, and then from like Eric Andre, it really was like I kind of got into this like sweet spot where I ended up working on all these cool alternative comedy shows. I was an editor on Comedy Bang Bang, and Tim and Eric Bedtime Stories. I ended up directing a season of On Cinema. I edited a lot of On Cinema. My sort of like way in, and like the way I sort of climbed up the food chain a little bit there was in post production. I was very I'd been editing since I was a kid. I like my first editing software was some like Lego movie maker thing, and it was, so I already understood nonlinear editing long before ever getting into film school. So really, coming into the industry, it was like, what's the tangible thing that I can bring to the table? And it was editing. And at that company, they're absolutely productions and Adult Swim, like they really do treat their editors like artists. And I can confidently say 10 years of post production, like that's not the case everywhere. Like editors are really are treated like button pushers in the industry. And I've been on jobs where that was the case, but I never at absolutely. You're always a part of the conversation. You're treated more like a writer, or like a director. And a lot of their editors ended up becoming directors, so it just kind of made sense for me to like stick around, really learn my craft, and also figure out what I wanted to say, because I knew I wanted to make films. I knew I wanted to make feature films. Getting to my first feature seemed so impossible just because I knew it would have to be something I would write myself, um and would probably have to be about me or my experience on some level, because like, I think the best first features are. I just didn't know what to say for years, like I had nothing really to say. So I spent a lot of time like making web series and stuff like that. And it really wasn't until I came out as trans in 2000. I don't know. Time doesn't exist anymore.
It's very warped, past 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, especially like I don't know. It's like for me, like my after I came out as trans, like my life got so much better, and then COVID started. And like so time is just this big weird blur. It was like the before time and then whatever now is. So I don't remember the year. But yeah, after coming out and going through the experience of like starting my transition, and you know, also just reflecting on my life, and recontextualizing a lot of the experiences I had both as an artist and as just as a person. I I knew that my first feature would need to be about being trans and working in comedy. Um, just because, yeah, it was what I knew, and it was really where I came from. And I was fortunate enough to really like come up around just like some of the most talented comedians of all time. And I got to work with Sacha Baron Cohen. I really, I'm lucky. I've gotten to just kind of continue film school for 10 years and really learn hands on from some truly like genius people.
So with the People's Joker, it's really fascinating because it's a film. It is, you've described it as somewhat autobiographical. It obviously has that memoir aspect to it. But if somebody was to tell you, I'm making a first film about my personal experience and growing up and coming out and all these things, you wouldn't immediately leap to think it's also going to be a crazy, like multifaceted multimedia parody of like DC Comics and stuff. So how did all those aspects come together for you? Like when did this project did it coalesce from many different threads over the years, like, Inland Empire style, or was it something like you had that concept? I'm assuming it wouldn't have been that much earlier than the Joker film coming out in 2019, because you really use that as a template in a lot of ways.
Honestly, I mean, I do think it is kind of Inland Empire style, which I love is just a descriptor of anything, um, like hot dog or hamburger style, Inland Empire style. Um, but yeah, it really was. It was a lot of different things sort of coming together. Like I knew in 2019 that I wanted to make a movie processing uh what I've always called my irony poisoning and my problem with like being sincere and like being authentic and like because that was really the struggle for me in like coming out as trans. Because comedy was a safe space for me to do a lot of queer stuff and I did drag in a lot of my uh videos that I would make. My aesthetic was always really kind of grounded in this queerness and I wanted but it was detached. It was always detached and kind of coming from a place of irony and insecurity and doubt and kind of throwing authenticity under the bus, for the sake of, out of fear of being embarrassed, basically. um and I wanted to sort of make something that was a comedy and but was kind of analyzing that and really looking at like what it's also like to come out in an industry populated mostly by straight cis men, um and kind of do that. And then yeah, I saw Todd Phillips Joker, and that movie really did inspire me in a lot of ways. Like I've always loved Batman and the Batman canon, and I read comics, and I don't love I never would say like I love superhero movies. Um, but I do love superhero storytelling. Watching that movie, it was the first time I had ever seen a superhero movie where there was like any sort of class consciousness to it,
Yeah, I
and
agree.
it really felt like I don't know, it kind of opened my eyes to just like, oh shit, like these are usually actually just propaganda films. It's the same stuff that was going on in the 80s with like, Commando and like all these big like blockbuster movies. Like these films are normally used to justify like capitalist atrocities. And here is a movie about a mentally ill man who the system completely failed him. His family system completely failed him, and he did everything he was told to do. He tried everything he was, and um there was just a sensitivity to it that really did resonate with me as a trans person and as somebody that's dealt with mental illness in my past. And like, I mean, it's it really hit me hard. Did you like the Todd Phillips Joker? I almost
I,
called it the
I
original
really enjoyed
Joker.
it. I was completely like skeptical of it before it came out. I thought, if you're really going to try to sell me a movie that's like, you know, the Joker, so edgy, you've never seen it. I'm like, that's been done so many times at this point. And then I don't know what it was, but something about like the discourse around it and like the weird backlash it had where they were like people were convinced it was going to cause a shooting. I was like, I don't know, we already had our Joker shooting like 5 years before that. Everyone seemed to have like memory hold. Like it was almost like a
Oh
weird
yeah.
repressed, like people forgot that it happened during Dark Knight Rises, and they were like, what if this thing happens? It's like, well, you're thinking that because it already did happen. But so there was this whole weird like cultural zeitgeist around it, and I became sort of intrigued. And then I saw it, and I did really really like it. Like exactly what you're saying, the fact that it had that kind of class consciousness, and that it was a superhero movie in which the superhero, I mean, there was no superhero because he was like a kid at this point, and to the extent his presence was there and his father and everything else, it was like he was the villain basically, which I thought was fascinating. I actually did a podcast a while ago where it was like just short little discussions of like that film, Parasite, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and what was the fourth one? The Irishman, because I felt like all of them had this kind of class-based violence in like their climaxes, and I just found they were like
Yeah.
fascinating to compare that way. So yeah, no, I really dug Joker, and actually one of the interesting things about your film watching it was it sort of it stood on its own so well that I would watch parts of it and then I would suddenly have this weird sense of like deja vu and be like, oh yeah, this is actually like riffing on a beat from Joker. But I was like kind of paying attention to like your character's relationship with the mother and forgetting like then she was in like the hospital bed and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Like this is like a parallel to what happens in Joker. So it's such it's down so many rabbit holes because Joker itself is already a riff on the DC mythos, and then this is a riff on that. So I loved that aspect of it, that like Hall of Mirrors aspect of it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it really basically when I decided to do this, it really coincided with the pandemic starting and like pre-vax COVID, and like I was living alone. I don't really talk to my family. I was like felt the loneliest I had ever been in my life, like when everything started shutting down. So I really just started watching a ton of Batman stuff and I rewatched Joker and all that stuff, and like it really was just this like source of comfort for me, like really just absorbing as much Batman content as I could in a short span of time, like May 2020 through like I'd say like the end of that summer. I was only consuming Batman content. um so yeah, there's like a lot of, I think, like it was really fun putting the movie together because it really was kind of just like making this big puzzle like out of all these existing pieces, and like because I knew the story I wanted to tell and I knew all the emotional beats and stuff like that, but like really diving into all of the Batman lore, really it really it was just such a joy during one of the darkest periods of our nation's history and just like my personal history. um and yeah, I mean, like I think like the project itself kind of came out of this. It was right around the time, actually, like Todd Phillips, he was quoted, and I'm sure he was like, it was something he said out of context, like I'm not trying to throw him under the bus with this at all, but he was talking about how like it's hard to do comedy with woke culture, which is like such a boring subject for anyone to talk about. But that inspired my co-writer Brie LaRose to basically commission me to re-edit Todd Phillips' Joker. It really
Ah,
all started with this
wow,
like,
that's fascinating.
yeah, just
So it was
like
almost like a video essay at first.
almost, yeah, like it really was gonna start as this like found, like not a found footage film like, Paranormal Activity or whatever, but like a remix. Like it was gonna be just like a remix movie um that would follow a narrative thread, and it always kind of had this like one woman show vibe to it, but like, yeah, I was originally like gonna just kind of re-edit the whole thing, but like, I mean, the longer I wasn't getting hired to like
Mhm.
add fart sound effects to Scott Ackerman's eyeballs blinking or whatever on a television show, the more time I had to like really just sit down and make it all original content. And I was hosting, um I used to have a web series called Hot Topics with Vera Drew that was basically just my, I was trying to get sponsored by Hot Topic. um and I made a web series about it. And it was, the idea was I was trying to have my high school emo girl phase in my 30s finally, and on Hot Topics time. And it was on that show that I kind of like publicly announced to, the very few fans that it had. It wasn't really like, it wasn't popping off. It had a pretty niche following, but I said, I'm making a Joker movie, and it's going to be about being trans and you're coming out as trans, working in comedy and complicated mother daughter stories. And I want anybody, any artists or musicians who like want to help me just, put together this big weird like remix multimedia experience, like reach out to me here. And I really only expected like, you know, three or four like people to reply, like, and you know, like kind of just then be moving on with my day. But like the response was so overwhelming. Like I got 200 like different artists like just on that like first week that were like wanting to basically help me tell this story, like, and most of them were musicians, um and animators. So that's really where like the aesthetic of the movie kind of came together, was
Mm.
this sort of mixed media approach. And yeah, I got to basically build the movie around set pieces. Like we were writing the script while we were making concept art and putting together animatics. And like we had this whole fight scene at the end of the movie that's in the style of the Batman the animated series, and that was something we put together before we even had the script done. Like I started putting that sequence together. So it really it was this like filmmaking experience that I not a lot of first time filmmakers get to have, and I was so lucky. Like I'm so lucky and grateful. Like so many people were there um making this possible. And like I said, like I got to basically make it in the same way they make these movies, like centering it really around like, okay, what's our chase scene in act 3, and what's well, she's got to walk down the stairs, so what's you know, who's gonna make the staircase and stuff like that. It was really cool.
It's funny that it flows so nicely, and yet at the same time there is like that sketch comedy feel to it, where you have those set pieces, and it's jagged in like a really cool way, like you said, like a puzzle. Like there's parts where you're using Legos as the characters, you know, there's parts, and there's the part like you said that's animated like the series and all of that. um One thing that struck me is there's obviously, and you know, this is partly due to it being during COVID, but there's obviously a lot of green screen. Like how much in terms of like actors, I know obviously backgrounds were almost entirely I believe it looked like probably mostly entirely constructed via animation or computer, you know, generated backgrounds and things like that. But in terms of actors, were you often in the same room together, or was that also shot separately and sort of seamed together?
I honestly think the only reason the movie works is because we were very fortunate enough to, like, the main like principal photography, like we were basically able to shoot it like how you would normally shoot. This wasn't pre-vax COVID, but you know, we were getting everybody tested. The crew was so small. It was like me, our DP, a sound guy, and sometimes we'd have a PA.
Mhm.
um, and usually that PA was like my girlfriend or like a friend that could show up. And um, we shot it all in the course of 5 days. Um, but yeah, like we had the principal cast all in the room together for the bulk of the film. My character, Lynn Downey, who played the mother, Nate Foston, who plays Penguin, um, and so on. Like basically the main cast, we were all there. And it was I still don't really know how we did it, because 5 days like was crazy. Like it was crazy shooting
So
a
all in
feature.
5 days.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. I do want to discuss obviously the kind of controversy and excitement and everything that has swirled
Sure.
around the film since September. But before we get to that, I want to touch on in terms of the film and its relationship to you and your story. I, you know, as I said, you've talked about the film being autobiographical. Obviously, there is, you know, a heavily fictionalized component to it, given that it takes place in this weird sort of off-brand DC universe setting. But with all that said, like, could you like what parts of the film, aside from all the, you know, that craziness, like what parts of the film were more fictionalized, if you want to talk about that, and like what parts were sort of more hewing to your actual experience? I know for one thing, obviously, in your career, although you were doing comedy, you were also doing a lot of filmmaking, which isn't present in the film. So, like, were there what parts of it did you decide to sort of take in a different direction, and I guess why in that case? Like, what worked for the story in that sense?
That's so nobody's ever asked me this about the movie. So that's cool. um,
I'm glad to be original.
no, good job. Um, wow, it's kind of crazy. Like, honestly, the movie is just so like really like very kind of literally autobiographical at times. I'm definitely not supposed, this is like a legal thing I'm definitely not supposed to say, but there's conversations in there that were conversations that I literally had with an ex, and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. I think like the directions that it really got fictionalized were the sort of I guess like the satire of it, and the like I wasn't, there's a whole plot point of Joker's character getting on an Saturday Night Live type show called UCB Live.
Right, literally
And
hosted by
then
Lauren Michaels. I love how you changed the name of the show, but it's still it's still the same producer.
yeah, yeah. Well, that just gets you the joke twice then. It's really the only reason to do it. And burn two bridges at the same time. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like I mean I I took UCB classes and it really was this like alienating experience. Like it cost so much money. And I have a lot of problems with SNL and um the fact that they're really just like a part of our military industrial complex. Like they literally just like decide elections and sort of like dumb down political narratives. And they've been doing that forever. Um and I think a lot of that stuff, like, well, I didn't really have direct experience. Like I never worked with Lauren Michaels. Um thank God, because he sounds like a pervert.
And now perhaps you never will.
Yeah, no, yeah, no, that's for sure. Um, it made sense in this kind of like world that Bree and I and everybody involved were kind of building of like comedy actually being illegal and this dangerous thing and this thing that's like literally weaponized. I think that was kind of the biggest leap I took. The sort of more like spiritual elements to the movie are like even just like the sort of purple world space that we see
Mm-hmm.
Joker in and stuff. Like a lot of it, the vision and the visual aspects of this movie are coming from a very honest and real place of just my experience and my life.
So let's now get to the premiere of the film, or I guess partial premiere. Like you had one screening. I think you were supposed to have several, right, at the Toronto Film Festival.
Yeah, we got into Toronto International Film Festival, which
Yeah, and what was that process like? Because
I mean that
that's
was
great.
crazy. Like, yeah, like that was I mean that was crazy. My film, nobody would know about my film were it not for a man by the name of Peter Kaplowski, who is a programmer at TIFF at Toronto Film Festival, and he heard about the project uh over a year ago, just from the sort of like community project angle of it. Like he'd heard that some Tim and Eric editor was basically doing a remix movie of the Joker, so he reached out to me and asked more about the project and told us that we should consider submitting it to TIFF. And um at that point, like I was really only thinking about like, okay, I'll probably finish this movie, I'll screen it once, and then just like toss it up online, and we'll have a few laughs with friends, and that'll be the end of the story. And yeah, he really kind of changed the direction of the movie in a really cool way for me, and encouraged me to sort of like, let's aim higher, let's not use any footage that we don't own the rights to, let's like really make this an original thing and really make this like my first feature film and not just something we're just like screening once and tossing up online. Um, and then once it got into TIFF, there was a period where, I mean, for months, it was like, okay, we're in TIFF. Okay, we're maybe not in TIFF. Okay, we're in TIFF, but now we got to convince like some shareholders uh, to screen this. Okay, the shareholders are convinced, but now we've got this sponsor who's worried or whatever. Like, it was really just this like months and months of like um a bunch of punk rock people having to convince people who've been in the film business and are really just like trying to protect their film festival. So I don't blame them for really drawing out the process. It's a very non-traditional film, particularly for a huge international film festival. But it was finally like the day before we were supposed to announce that we got in, that we finally had the confirmation that we were in. And we went to Toronto. It was absolutely crazy. I had wanted to go to a film festival my entire life, and um it was like a Wizard of Oz type experience or something. It just felt so it was such a dream. It was just such a bizarre experience. And I'd never pictured anything like that for the movie. And it really did seem like we were going to be fine. And there was always talk, we might hear from Warner Brothers, but I was very confident that the movie could screen because it's 100% protected by fair use, because it's about my experience as a trans woman. And it's clearly a parody of these characters. Like, I'm not trying to trick anybody into thinking that this is like an official DC project. So going into TIFF, like, we were all very confident that, like, okay, we're going to be able to do this. And then it was like 6 days before, it was the Friday before we were supposed to premiere. We were supposed to premiere on a Tuesday. We finally got the call from WB, and they basically said, "Hi, we're aware of the People's Joker, um, and we would like to watch it to basically form an opinion on this." And this came from Warner Brothers legal department, if you can believe it. Uh, and
I can
so
believe it.
yeah, there was a weekend there where it was like, okay, they have the link, and they have the link. We'll see what happens. I guess we'll see what happens. And we didn't hear from them for the entirety of that Monday. Um, and it was like, God, cool, great, that's great news. We're fine. We're gonna be able to screen tomorrow. And then it was like literally 24 hours before the premiere that we finally heard back. They called us and they sent us a letter. It was originally misreported as a cease and desist, but it was literally just like a strongly worded letter saying that, wow, it was actually kind of nice. They said, while we think the movie's great and Vera's story is compelling, we think that this movie does infringe on these characters and isn't a parody, and something sort of along those lines. And from there, we were back in this state of like, okay, we're gonna screen. Okay, we're not gonna screen. Okay, we're gonna go find another theater and do like a bootleg screening, and then that'll be the last time people see it. Everybody pull out your phones, let's tape it. And really what it all came down to was like TIFF advocated for me as an artist, and really like spent that entire Tuesday negotiating with the head of Warner Brothers in Canada to basically let us screen once and have our premiere. Because at that point, I mean, it was less than 24 hours before we were supposed to show. Like, so like we had sold a bunch of tickets. Like, we had like, and the movie was getting a lot of momentum. Because I was finally done with it, and I was finally also like doing press on it and like talking about it and stuff. So, like there was already, they kind of were WB was basically put in a position where it's like, okay, we're gonna like we'll let these people have their night, and then from there, please pull all other screenings. So that's what we did. And it was a very difficult decision, but it was a decision I made. Like I could have, I don't think with TIFF, like, I mean, with TIFF, it really was like, here's the deal. We're going to be able to premiere and then that'll be it. But when it came time, because we were supposed to play at like 7 other film festivals in those coming weeks after TIFF, um, I ended up deciding to pull the film from all of them just to basically like hit pause on my experience making it, because I was never expecting it to blow up. I was never expecting WB to like get involved. I always thought they were going to like kind of take the approach that Disney took with Escape from Tomorrow,
Yes. Yeah.
where you're familiar with that, right? Like
Yeah.
they really did nothing for that, and like they just
And
kind of
that's
like
Disney. You'd think if anybody would be, cracking
oh,
down, it's them.
totally. And they shot that movie in their park. I mean, like
Right.
I think like I think like whatever a filmmaker wants to do within the bounds of the law, like go for it. But to me, it's like we made a bunch of original material. Like we didn't like rip off anything made by DC. It really just kind of all comes down to trademark, and really like
Yeah.
these trademark laws, they don't exist for the reason that you are told they exist. They only exist to like screw over, artists like me and all the people that worked on this. It's like the people that created Batman and the Joker have been dead for years. Like, and the creator of the Joker, like the original Joker character was like a guy who just calls into a radio show and places sports bets, like outrageous, like gamble. He's like an outrageous gambler or something. It's like the characters evolved over the years. These are like stories that are like actually told by communities of people. Like that's what comics are. Like it's not just one person. And how can you claim that one entity owns what we are constantly told is our modern myths? Like it's constantly shoved down our throats that these characters are our modern myths, and that like there's, to me, it's like myth belongs to the people
Yeah. They
then.
love to
And
have it both ways.
oh yeah, completely. They love to like claim that like these characters have like a biblical reference, but anytime a consumer wants to be a part of the conversation, that's when it becomes an issue. um so yeah, the movie is definitely, it's the first of its kind, so I can see why it's ruffled a few feathers, but um it's perfectly legal. Its existence is perfectly legal. So I hope I get to screen it again soon.
So we're gonna transition into the Patreon part where we're gonna probably focus a little more on Twin Peaks, although there's definitely some subjects with this film that I want to keep touching on. But before we get there, usually this is the spot where I tell people, I tell the guests, tell people where they can find you and where your work is and all of that. Your situation is pretty unique here because it's sort of in limbo at the moment. But give people a sense, I guess, of first of all where they can find the work that is, out there and available, and where they can follow you and all that. But also where you think cautiously that may be heading in terms of where they can maybe hopefully see the People's Joker in the next period.
Yeah, you can follow me at Vera Drew 22. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. I just started using Tumblr again. I'm hoping to start using that a
Oh,
little bit
Tumblr,
more.
there's a blast from the past.
Oh yeah. It's the Twitter's so bad now. I need to go back to Tumblr. But yeah, that's where you can find me, Vera Drew 22. And then as far as like where the movie is gonna be, like I really can't say anything specific right now, but um it'll be out there again soon. Like just keep a lookout for it, especially if you're interested. Just follow me, and I never shut up about the Joker. So you'll know what's happening. But yeah, it's a movie that's supposed to be seen in theaters. So I would say hold out until you can see it in theaters, and maybe that'll be soon.
So we've talked about, or you've talked about, with me when we were kind of setting this up, the fact that Twin Peaks was an influence on this, or kind of shaped it in some way. I want to get into a little bit of the specifics of that. So I guess I'll say on my part, I'd be interested to hear some of your thoughts on the thematic connections, because what I noticed more and what kind of jumped out to me was the formal connections. And I think you further confirm this talking about the digital work and then the Purple World section of The Return, which to me is the most like 2000s davidlynch.com part of The Return.
Oh yeah,
That
yeah.
like opening sequence with like NATO in the throne room or whatever, the giant, the fireman's palace and all of that. Like that part really feels like in that same spirit. And I saw a lot of that in your movie. I saw a lot of the like kind of crazy 2000s cacophony when like Lynch, really embraced all the possibilities of digital and all of that. So that was kind of what jumped out to me. But from your perspective, making it obviously, and having those in mind, what are the Twin Peaks threads that you see connecting this and the People's Joker? And we're going to pause the public section there and continue this conversation for patrons. You can become a patron at patreon.com/lostinthemovies. For the $5 a month tier, you'll be able to hear the second part of this conversation. We are going to talk a lot about Twin Peaks, what her thoughts are on The Return, on the original series, and also actually get into some other subjects like Southland Tales, another film that I'm discussing in the next few weeks on another podcast that I thought I saw some connections to the People's Joker with, and we get into that as well, so you can hear that too. The link is below, again, in the show notes, along with other ways that you can follow Vera Drew's work, and hopefully soon you'll be able to check out the People's Joker itself as well.